because they are in charge of the solvency, the prudential supervision of that entity. So that's the way the system is designed. If that works well, it will not happen. What you're saying, it doesn't work. But please, we are living in a Solvency I framework. A lot of things are going to change, and that should improve. And it would improve because the dialogue between the supervisors in EIOPA will be far more intense going forward than it is today. But I accept your point, and Poland is not alone. There are other countries where that is the same. It can only be resolved in a good cooperation between the local supervisor and the home supervisor of the foreign entity.
Terri, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would like to. I think I worry personally about some of what's going on creating advantages for larger firms. And I think if the regulatory system, if the world has changed such that the smaller firms are no longer viable and able to compete in the marketplace because they're just less efficient and they just are no longer viable, that's one thing, if the market's driving it. If regulation is driving the large firms, the smaller firms to be less competitive, I think that's a terrible, terrible mistake for us to make. Because, and I go back to the resilience of the market, part of what makes this market resilience is that you can have players fail. So we don't want to create a system where we advantage the large global companies at the expense of the smaller companies. And I worry about things like, for example, setting, this is where I get back to capital requirements being so blunt. If you set capital requirements that are constraining, and then you say, but you, big company, if you can go through all of this expense to get a model approved, we're going to let you go under a different set of requirements, a lower set of requirements. That model puts the smaller companies at a disadvantage. So I just think we need to be careful about those kinds of things. And in the U.S., we do a lot of, and I know you do also here in Europe, you have this, what's it called, proportionality principle. We got to really be careful about only imposing on the smaller companies what they need in light of the risk that they have and who they are.
Who else would like to ask a question? Right at the very back there. Right at the back. And I'm hoping you're not going to ask when is lunch.
Marcin Kawinski, Warsaw School of Economics. You, as a regulator, I would like to ask you, or past regulator, to what extent you were inspired by regulations from other segments of financial sector? So, and to what extent do you think there is a need for a kind of a consistent approach? And to what extent there is a danger of I would call it regulatory arbitrage?
I'm going to give a 10-second answer to that from my own perspective. I actually found some of the most inspiring examples from other sectors of regulation were not from the financial services sector. Sectors such as oil, airlines, chemical industries, etc., face some very similar, some quite different, but also very similar problems. Terri.
Yeah, I think I could speak in the U.S., we did a lot of looking at what the banking regulators, supervisors do, and really starting around the time of Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which passed in the U.S. in 1999, and I led a group for a couple years that had ongoing discussions with the banking supervisors to better understand how we did things. And we found that actually we do a lot of things very similarly. Our examination processes and our analysis and so forth, there was a lot of similarity between the U.S. and EU. I'm sorry, between the U.S. insurance and banking regulators. And when the Basel II, no, it was Basel I, the trading book market risk charge, we took a very careful look at that, whether there was anything value to us in that, and kind of concluded it wasn't really what we thought it was. So.
But Marcin, what's really happening, and I think that's probably the same in the US as this is in Europe, is that the insurance regulators have been looking at the banking regulation. For instance, Basel II, Solvency II is adopting the three-pillar approach of Basel II. Also in our capital, on the Solvency II, the fact that we divide the capital in tiers was also based on Basel II. Now the bankers have changed it, and that's the problem. The problem is we look at what the bankers are doing, but they never look at what we are doing. That's the problem. And they presume that the insurance business model is the same as the banking business model, which it isn't. And that is a big problem that we see today in all these countries which believe that the best reaction to the financial crisis is not now to put prudential supervision of banks and insurance under the central banks, as if this is the holy grail. It is not, because the insurance industry will have to explain again and again to its supervisor what insurance is, because the bankers believe that they can do it, and they can't.
I just have to say one thing, because this is, I remember years ago, this goes back to probably 2002, maybe 2003. And I don't want it to sound like I'm trashing banking supervisors, because they got a tough job and they're doing a fine job. But every once in a while you get one of them coming into an insurance meeting and saying, you guys need to do this. And I remember in 2002, one of them coming in and saying, they were all proud of everything they were doing in Basel II on operational risk. You know, we're going to model operational risk, and you guys in insurance, you need to get on the stick, and you need to get your companies modeling operational risk. And I remember, excuse me, I appreciate that you're dealing with challenges in your sector. We got our own problems, and our problems right now are how do we deal with variable annuities and guarantees and the optionality in it and modeling the capital requirements and asset liability matching in life companies, and how do you deal with that? What are you doing on asset liability matching in the banks? And the guy said, oh, that's pillar 2. That's pillar 2. So the reason I say, of course, and then that was one of the problems, of course, in the financial crisis. But the reason I say that is we really do have, given the differences in the industry, we got different problems, and we got to pay attention to those problems. And there's a real risk, as the bankers get more involved in our sector, there's a real risk that they pull us away from dealing what's important in our sector. And we got to be careful about that.
We're going to have a final question now, and then we'll close. So right at the very back, over there.
I'm the representative of the Polish Society of Actuaries, and I would like to pinpoint to one thing I like from you, madam. You pointed at rules-based versus principles-based. And if you look at current Solvency II regulations, which constitute 2,500 pages with 500 added recently on April 30th, I cannot say this is really a principles-based regulation. This is a rules-based regulations which is heavily influencing the costs of capital and the cost of development of the company. The principles as such should be written in short languages and understandable for each and everyone, should be clear, concise and understandable. With this amount of material, we spend a lot of time on details which can influence the cost of capital. And we talk and look through pages, and really, from my point of view, this is a bad example of a principle-based regulation.
Okay, clear, concise, and understandable. If you could make your answers that, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, in my experience as a supervisor, one of the reasons that you got these very complex rules is because the industry wanted them. They wanted certainty. And so you're going to have it one of two ways. You can either have principles, but the regulator has a lot of discretion. The industry doesn't like that. Or you're going to get these very detailed rules. My preference is a regulatory is kind of blunt rules that are generally not constraining, so firms can manage their business, but a lot of discretion for the regulator to intervene in various ways when they see problems that could jeopardize policyholders.
Carol, you have the last word.
Well, no, I tend to agree with Terry that sometimes I've seen that too, and the Solvency II particularly, that when we had a principle, the industry came to ask me, what does it mean? And particularly the actuarial profession. They said, we will develop rules to calculate the best estimate, because people look at the best estimate different in different countries in the European Union. So I think the message that we should carry out to you is, don't ask for regulation. Don't ask for it, because you will get it. And I think we should look at regulation in a more modest way.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Terri. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Terri Vaughan, Karela van Hulle and Paul Sharma, thank you for being with us and for this very fascinating discussion. Myślę, że jeszcze raz powinniśmy brawami podziękować naszym znakomitym gościom. Thank you. Drodzy Państwo, to była niezwykła dyskusja o współczesnym modelu nadzoru, a po południu czekają nas kolejne ciekawe refleksje, uwagi i także dyskusja, mam nadzieję, że również i równie emocjonująca, o ubezpieczalności, o wyzwaniach i ograniczeniach z tym związanych, ale początek tego naszego popołudniowego spotkania dopiero o godzinie 15:15, a teraz już z wielką przyjemnością zapraszam Państwa na lunch i życzę smacznego. Do zobaczenia.